Like any language, photography is governed by a set of rules and conventions which, when followed, allow us to communicate effectively with precision and with passion. In photojournalism, the clarity with which your work speaks to its audience is dependent almost entirely on understanding the rules of composition, the voice of the photograph. In this lesson, we will consider some of these rules that govern photojournalism, like the rule of thirds and the concept of leading lines. The power of photojournalism comes from its ability to speak in a universal language. If we understand that language, people will understand our work. We'll explore some of these ideas by looking at a set of photographs that I shot during the war in Bosnia between 1991 and 1993. The rule of thirds asks that you imagine your image divided into 9 equal segments, 2 vertical and 2 horizontal lines. This rule says that you should position the most important elements in your scene along these lines or at the points at which they intersect. This creates a sense of graphic balance to the frame. Let's take a look at an example. I took this photograph at the moment Serbian troops invaded a small Croatian town. The rule of thirds is what gives this photograph its emotional impact. The woman sitting in the lower third of the frame, with all that negative space as a background, punctuated by bullet holes in the bus shelter. All these elements together conspire to give this frame its emotional depth. When we look at a photograph, our eye is naturally drawn along lines. By thinking about how you place lines in your composition, you can affect the way that we view the image. Lines pull us into the picture. Lines pull us towards the subject. Lines pull us on a journey through the frame towards a particular scene in the frame. There are many different types of lines. There are straight lines, diagonals, curves, zigzags, radials. Any of these incorporated in the composition of your frame can strengthen the impact of your image. This photograph was taken on the same day as the previous image during the Serbian invasion of this Croatian town. This woman fled into a church as the Serbian troops were marching through the town. And I followed her inside and was immediately drawn to the very stark vertical lines that were shooting up everywhere in the frame. And we can see that the vertical lines in the paneling on the walls, the vertical lines represented by the woman herself and the statue behind her. Every line in this frame draws our eye upwards to the heavens to which the woman is praying. That is what, for me, gives this photograph its emotional power. In this photograph, which is essentially a portrait of a girl in a Croatian village, so while she is in sharp focus and clearly the center of our attention, I've avoided leaving a sense of emptiness behind her by balancing her with 2 of her friends who are in the background, occupying less of a central role and are in somewhat soft focus. This leads to a very balanced and a very pleasant looking frame. Our point of view has a huge impact on the composition of our photograph, and as a result, it can greatly affect the message that the image conveys. Rather than just shooting from eye level, consider photographing from high above or down at ground level, from the side, from the back, from a long way away, or from very close up. Your point of view is an integral part of what it is that you want your photograph to say. This photograph of Croatian troops marching down a rural road on their way to engage with Serbian infantry is a very good example of what I mean by point of view. I'm shooting over the shoulder of the Croatian soldier on the right-hand side of the frame. And what I wanted to do in terms of creating a point of view was to look at this march down the rural road from the point of view of one of the soldiers participating in the event. If we accept that photography is a language, and this language is driven by certain rules and conventions, then we can see in these compositions where these various rules and conventions come into play and help us to create a more dynamic, more passionate photography. The woman in the bus shelter is the example of a photograph that was assembled using the rule of thirds. The woman praying in the church is an example of a photograph that came together bearing in mind the idea of leading lines and using those leading lines to build the power and the emotion into the frame. The photograph of the little girl with her friends playing behind her speaks to the idea of understanding the rules of balance in creating a frame. And finally, the soldiers marching down the rural road is an example of how we use a point of view to establish what it is that we want to say, how it is that we want the viewer to look at the photograph and understand what it is that we're trying to convey. In this assignment, I'd like you to imagine yourselves having been asked by an airline's in-flight magazine to shoot a story introducing the town or city where you live as a tourist destination for foreign travelers. You will need to produce a series of between 10 and 15 images which show the unique culture in which you live, as well as showing scenes of everyday life which can be used to encourage people to visit your country. With this assignment, you should be able to fall back on two of the major ideas that we covered in previous lessons. The idea driving the digital workflow and the idea driving the editing process. You should be able to take the images from this assignment and organize them logically and efficiently using the filing system that we created in the digital workflow assignment. And similarly, you should be able to open up the folder containing all of the photographs from this assignment and edit them in a coherent, logical narrative that tells the story.